3 minutes. That was exactly how long Dante Moretti gave his fiancée to live. He stood inside the dark mahogany closet, watching through the slats, his hand gripping a suppressed beretta. Just 3 feet away, the woman he planned to marry, a humble waitress named Sophie, was hovering over his dying mother. The maid had warned him. She claimed Sophie was an assassin, sent by a rival family to finish the job. Dante didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was undeniable. He watched Sophie pull a strange, unlabeled vial from her pocket. She uncorked it. She moved toward the oxygen mask. Dante raised his gun, his heart shattering. He was ready to pull the trigger. But then, the maid walked in, and Sophie turned around. What happened next didn't just save a life, it exposed a 20-year-old lie that would burn the Moretti empire to the ground. The scent of stale coffee and grease was something Sophie Clark could never quite scrub out of her hair. It was the perfume of survival. At 24, she was the head waitress at Dino's, a hole-in-the-wall diner on the south side of Chicago that served the best cherry pie and the worst attitude in the city. Sophie wasn't supposed to be here. 4 years ago, she was top of her class in nursing school at Loyola. She had the hands of a healer and the mind of a diagnostician. But when her father's debts to the wrong kind of loan sharks came due, tuition money became stay-alive money. She dropped out, picked up an apron, and buried her dreams under double shifts and polite smiles. Then she met Dante. He wasn't a loan shark. He was a whale. Dante Moretti, the man who owned the construction firms, the shipping logistics, and half the politicians in Illinois. He had come into the diner late one rainy Tuesday, looking like he carried the weight of the world in the lines of his Italian silk suit. She hadn't fawned over him. She'd just told him he looked like he needed decaf if he wanted to survive the night. He'd laughed a rusty, unused sound and left $100 tip. 6 months later, there was a ring on her finger worth more than the entire diner. But a diamond didn't buy acceptance. "You're trembling," Dante said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated against her back. Sophie looked up from the passenger seat of the armored SUV. They were passing through the wrought-iron gates of the Moretti estate. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress of grey stone and manicured hedges that looked sharp enough to cut skin. "I'm not trembling," Sophie lied, clutching her purse tighter. Inside was her inhaler and a small notebook she used to track her father's remaining debts. Your mother doesn't like me, Dante. We both know that." Dante reached over, covering her rough, chapped hand with his smooth, manicured one. "Isabella is traditional. She thinks I need a strategic alliance, a wife from the Genovese or the Vitti family. She sees a waitress and she sees a weakness." "And what do you see?" Sophie asked the question she asked him every week. Dante's eyes, usually dark and guarded, softened. "I see the only person who hasn't asked me for a favor in 6 months. I see peace, Sophie. You are my peace." The car stopped. The gravel crunched like bones breaking. Waiting at the top of the stairs was Greta. Greta was the head housekeeper, a woman in her 50s, with hair pulled back so tight it pulled her eyelids into a permanent glare. She had served the Moretti family since Dante was in diapers. She was efficient, loyal, and she hated Sophie with a venom that felt prehistoric. "Mr. Moretti," Greta said, ignoring Sophie completely. "The doctor is upstairs. It's bad." Dante's demeanor shifted instantly. The lover vanished. The Don appeared. He was out of the car before the driver could open the door. Sophie scrambled to follow her heels, clicking frantically on the marble steps. "What happened?" Dante demanded, striding through the foyer. "She collapsed after tea," Greta said, her voice trembling with what sounded like genuine fear. "Her heart rate spiked. She's hallucinating. Dr. Aris says her kidneys are failing." They burst into the master bedroom. It smelled of lavender and decay. In the center of the massive four-poster bed lay Isabella Moretti. She was once a terrifying beauty. Now she looked like a wax figure left too close to a fire. Her skin was grey, her breathing ragged. Dr. Aris, a private concierge doctor on the Moretti payroll, was checking a monitor. He looked pale. "Dante," Isabella rasped. Her eyes were milky, unfocused. "My boy." Dante fell to his knees beside the bed, burying his face in her hand. "I'm here, Mama, I'm here." Sophie stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder. But her instincts, the ones honed in nursing clinicals and late-night study sessions, kicked in. She watched the monitor. Tachycardia, erratic rhythms, but her skin is dry, not clammy. Sophie stepped forward. "What is she on?" she asked. Dr. Aris looked at her with disdain. "Excuse me, Miss Clark. This is a medical situation." "I know," Sophie said, her voice gaining a surprising steeliness. "I'm asking what medications she was administered today, because that monitor shows atrial fibrillation, but she's not sweating. That's inconsistent with a standard heart failure episode." Greta stepped between Sophie and the bed. "You have no business here. You serve coffee, girl. Go to the kitchen where you belong." "Dante," Sophie pleaded. "Something isn't right. Look at her pupils, they're pinpoint." Dante looked up, his eyes red and wild with grief. "Sophie, please, not now. Wait in the hall." "But I said get out," Dante roared. Sophie flinched as if he'd struck her. She backed away, her heart hammering. As she turned to leave, she caught Greta's eye. The maid wasn't looking at Dante or Isabella. She was looking at Sophie. And for a split second, there was no grief in Greta's face, only a triumphant, chilling smirk. Sophie closed the door, leaning against the cold wall of the corridor. She knew that look. She had seen it on the streets. That was the look of someone who had just won a hand of poker by cheating. Sophie didn't go to the kitchen. She went to the library, pulled out her phone, and began to research. She had to save Isabella. Not because she liked the woman, but because if Isabella died tonight, Sophie knew with terrifying certainty that she would be blamed for it. 3 days passed. The atmosphere in the Moretti estate was suffocating. Isabella was slipping in and out of a coma. The best specialists from Zurich and New York had been flown in, but they were baffled. They called it rapid onset autoimmune failure. They offered palliative care. Dante was a ghost. He spent his days in his study and his nights by his mother's bedside. He barely looked at Sophie. And Greta was working her magic. It was Tuesday evening when Dante sat in his office, a glass of bourbon untouched on his desk. There was a knock. Greta entered, clutching a white apron, Sophie's apron from the kitchen. "Boss," Greta whispered, using the title she rarely used. I didn't want to bring this to you. I know you love her." Dante looked up, his eyes hollow. "What is it, Greta?" Greta walked forward and placed a small, clear Ziploc bag on the desk. Inside was a pinch of dried, crushed leaves. Foxglove. Digitalis, a powerful heart stimulant that in high doses caused cardiac arrest. "I found this in Miss Sophie's coat pocket when I was hanging it up." Greta lied smoothly. "I thought it was tea at first, but my grandmother, she used to grow herbs. I recognized it." Dante stared at the bag. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Foxglove. It mimics heart failure, sir, Greta said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. And I've seen things. When she brings your mother water, when she adjusts the pillows, Miss Sophie is always alone with her for a few moments. Stop, Dante warned, his voice dangerous. Sir, you have to face it. Greta pressed, playing the role of the concerned servant perfectly. She's a waitress with a mountain of debt. We ran a check on her father last week. Did you know he owes 50 grand to the Vitti family? The Vitti family, sir. Your enemies. Dante's blood ran cold. He didn't know that. Sophie had never told him the debt was to the Vittis. If the Vittis bought her, Greta let the sentence hang in the air like smoke. She kills your mother. You are devastated. The organization is weak. The Vittis strike. Dante stood up. He walked to the window, looking out at the rain-lashed grounds. He wanted to kill Greta for saying it. He wanted to fire her on the spot. But the logic, it was a jagged pill, but it fit down his throat. Sophie did have medical knowledge. She did have debt, and his mother was dying of symptoms that matched the herb on his desk. Get out, Dante said. Sir, leave the bag. Get out. When she was gone, Dante picked up the phone. Lorenzo, he said to his head of security, I need you to install a camera in my mother's room. Hidden, audio and visual. Feed it directly to my tablet, and disable the hallway cameras for the next hour. I don't want a record of what I might have to do. Understood, boss. Dante didn't confront Sophie. That wasn't the way of the Omerta. You didn't ask a traitor if they were a traitor. You watched them commit the crime, and then you buried them. That night, the storm knocked out the estate's main power grid. The backup generators kicked in, bathing the mansion in a dim emergency amber glow. Sophie was in the guest room she had been relegated to. She was packing a small bag. She couldn't stay here. The hostility was too much, and Dante had shut her out. But she couldn't leave Isabella to die. Earlier that day, while the nurses were on break, Sophie had managed to sneak a sample of Isabella's urine from the catheter bag. She had used a cheap over-the-counter toxicology test she bought at a pharmacy, the kind used by parents to test kids for drugs. But she had modified it to test for heavy metals, a trick she learned in her chemistry labs. The test hadn't shown digitalis. It hadn't shown autoimmune markers. It turned a deep, violent purple. Thallium, the poison of the assassin, odorless, tasteless, and slow. It caused hair loss, nerve damage, and organ failure. It was an old-school mob method. Sophie knew the doctors missed it because nobody looked for thallium anymore. It was a relic of the Cold War. She also knew that the only person who prepared Isabella's special herbal tea every morning wasn't the kitchen staff. It was Greta. Sophie looked at the clock. 2 a.m. The night nurse usually dozed off in the chair outside the room around this time. Sophie reached into her bag. She didn't have the standard antidote, Prussian blue. She couldn't get a prescription without alerting Dante, and if she told Dante that his beloved Greta was the killer, without proof he would throw her out. But Sophie had the next best thing. Activated charcoal and a solution of potassium. She had compounded herself in the kitchen, using dietary supplements. It was a desperate battlefield medical fix. She put the solution into a small glass vial. She put on her robe. She walked down the silent shadowed hallway toward the room where death waited. Inside the room, the shadows were deep. Sophie opened the door quietly. The night nurse was indeed asleep in the hall, snoring softly. Sophie slipped inside and closed the door. She approached the bed. Isabella's breathing was a rattle, the sound of a soul trying to detach from a body. Sophie took a deep breath. "I've got you, Isabella. Hold on." She didn't know that 10 feet away, behind the louvered doors of the walk-in closet, Dante Moretti was standing in the dark. He saw her silhouette. He saw her reach into her pocket. He saw the vial. Greta was right, Dante thought, a tear finally tracking down his cheek. She's going to finish it. He raised the Beretta. He aimed it directly at the base of Sophie's skull. He thumbed the safety off. Click. The sound was microscopic, but in the silence of the sick room, it was like a thunderclap. Sophie froze. "Drop it," Dante said. His voice was dead. It wasn't a shout. It was a command wrapped in absolute heartbreak. Sophie didn't turn around immediately. Her hand hovered over the oxygen mask, the vial of black liquid trembling slightly in her grip. "Dante," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's not what you think. I said drop it." Dante stepped out of the closet, the suppressed barrel of the gun leveling at her spine. "Turn around. Slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." Sophie slowly caped the vial and turned. The sight of him broke her. He wasn't the powerful Don she knew. He was a wounded animal lashing out. His eyes were rimmed with red, his jaw set so hard, a muscle feathered in his cheek. "You checked my father's debts," Sophie said, realizing the source of his rage. It wasn't a question. 50,000 to the Vitti family. Dante spat the words out. "You didn't think to mention that. You didn't think to mention that the people trying to dismantle my empire own your family." "I didn't tell you because I was ashamed," Sophie cried, tears spilling over. "I didn't want you to pay it. I wanted to fix it myself. I'm not one of your charity cases, Dante. So you made a deal with them instead." Dante took a step closer, the gun never wavering. "They wipe the debt. You wipe out my mother. Is that it? Is that the price of a life in your world?" "Sophie, 50 grand. "No," Sophie stepped forward right into the line of fire. "Dante, look at me. Really look at me. Do you think I could do that? Do you think I could kill the woman who gave birth to you? I don't know who you are anymore." Dante said, his voice trembling. "Greta found the foxglove in your coat. I saw the vial in your hand just now. You were going to pour poison down her throat while she slept." "It's not poison," Sophie held up the vial. "It's activated charcoal and potassium. It binds to toxins." "Lies," Dante hissed. "Put it down." "I won't," Sophie said, clutching the vial to her chest. "She doesn't have heart failure, Dante. She has thallium poisoning." Dante paused. The specificity of the word threw him off balance. "Thallium, it's a heavy metal." Sophie spoke fast, desperate, to get the words out before he pulled the trigger. "It's old school. It mimics autoimmune diseases. It causes nerve pain, tachycardia, and—" She pointed to the pillow behind her. "Look at the pillow, Dante." Dante frowned, his eyes flicking to the bed for a fraction of a second. "Look at it!" Sophie screamed. Dante looked. On the white silk pillowcase surrounding Isabella's pale head were clumps of silver hair, not just a few strands from aging chunks. "Thallium causes alopecia," Sophie said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Rapid hair loss. Heart failure doesn't do that. Autoimmune disease doesn't happen that fast. Someone has been feeding her rat poison, Dante, for weeks." Dante lowered the gun an inch. He remembered his mother complaining about her hairbrush being full 3 days ago. He had dismissed it as stress. "Greta found the foxglove," Dante muttered, confusion clouding his rage. "Why would she lie?" "Because," Sophie said, stepping closer to the bed, "Greta is the only one who prepares your mother's morning tea. The kitchen staff told me. No one else is allowed to touch it." Dante felt the room spinning. The narrative he had built, the one where Sophie was the villain and Greta the loyal servant, was cracking. But fear was a powerful anchor. "If you're lying," Dante said, raising the gun back up, "I will kill you myself. I won't let the guards do it. It will be me." "If I'm lying, she dies anyway," Sophie said, turning her back to the gun. She uncorked the vial again. "But if I'm right, this will buy her time until we can get her to a hospital for dialysis." Dante's finger tightened on the trigger. His training told him to shoot. His heart screamed at him to trust the woman who had held him while he cried. Sophie lifted the oxygen mask. She tilted Isabella's head back. Dante stopped breathing. He watched the black liquid disappear into his mother's mouth. He waited for the convulsions. He waited for the flat line. Isabella coughed. She swallowed. And then she took a deep, shuddering breath. The frantic beeping on the heart monitor slowed. 140 beats per minute. 130. 120. "It binds to the poison in the stomach," Sophie whispered, wiping Isabella's mouth. "It stops the absorption." Dante lowered the gun. He fell back against the closet door, the adrenaline crashing out of him, leaving him weak. He looked at Sophie, really looked at her, and saw the terror in her eyes. Not the terror of being caught, but the terror of losing him. "Sophie," he breathed. Before she could answer, the bedroom door flew open. Greta stood in the doorway, a silver tea tray in her hands. She stopped dead. She had expected to walk into a crime scene. She had expected to see Dante standing over Sophie's bleeding body, the problem solved, the Vitti debt framed as the motive. Instead, she saw Dante leaning against the wall, his gun at his side. She saw Sophie alive, standing by the bed. And she saw Isabella breathing deeply, color faintly returning to her cheeks. The tray rattled in Greta's hands. The china clattered. "Mr. Moretti." Greta's voice was high, tight. I heard voices. "Is everything—" She looked at the vial on the nightstand. The black residue of the charcoal. Dante pushed himself off the wall. His face was a mask of cold fury, but this time it wasn't directed at Sophie. He moved like a panther, silent and lethal, placing himself between Greta and the bed. "Come in, Greta," Dante said softly. Too softly. Greta took a tentative step inside. Her eyes darted around the room, assessing the threat. She was a survivor. She had survived the brutal world of the Chicago underworld for 30 years by being invisible and indispensable. Now she was exposed. "What is that?" Greta pointed a shaking finger at the vial. "What did she give her?" "Oh my God. Sir, did she poison her right in front of you? It's an antidote," Sophie said, her voice steady now that Dante was beside her. "For thallium." Greta's face twitched. It was a micro-expression, a momentary flash of panic, before she smoothed it over with outrage. "Thallium, don't be ridiculous. That's absurd. Sir, look at the girl. She's desperate. She's making up stories to cover her tracks." "The hair, Greta," Dante said. He pointed to the pillow. "Sophie tells me thallium makes the hair fall out. You've been brushing her hair every morning. You didn't notice." I thought it was the chemo from years ago coming back," Greta stammered. "I didn't want to worry you." "We didn't do chemo," Dante said. "My mother has never had cancer." The silence that followed was deafening. Greta had slipped. In her panic to create an excuse, she had invented a medical history that didn't exist. Dante raised the gun again. This time it was pointed at the woman who had raised him. Why? Greta's demeanor changed instantly. The hunched, servile posture of the housekeeper evaporated. She straightened her spine. Her face, usually blank and professional, twisted into a sneer of pure hatred. She dropped the tray. The silver teapot crashed to the floor, splashing hot tea onto the Persian rug. Because she is a thief. Greta screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. She stole my life. She gave you a home, Dante said, bewildered. She treated you like family. She treated me like a pet, Greta spat. She took a step forward, ignoring the gun. Do you know who I am, Dante? Do you really know? Dante frowned. You're Greta. You've been here since I was 5. I was here before that, Greta hissed. 25 years ago, I wasn't just the help. I was the one your father loved. Your father, the great Carlo Moretti. He loved me. We were going to run away together. We were going to leave this miserable life and move to Sicily. Sophie watched in horror. This was the twist, the root of the poison. But she... Greta pointed a jagged finger at the unconscious Isabella. She found out. She didn't get mad. Oh no, Isabella never gets mad. She gets even. She went to the commission. She told the bosses that my husband, my poor stupid husband who drove the car, was stealing from the shipments. My father had your husband killed, Dante said, the old family rumor surfacing in his mind. Isabella made him do it. Greta shrieked, tears of rage streaming down her face. She fabricated the evidence. She planted the money. She forced Carlo to kill the only man who could have protected me, and then she forced Carlo to stay with her for the good of the family. She trapped him, and she kept me here as a servant to watch her live the life that should have been mine, to raise her son. Greta's eyes locked onto Dante. I wiped your nose, Dante. I bandaged your knees. I loved you more than she ever did. But you are just like them. You bring this waitress in here, this gold digger, and you give her the ring that Carlo promised to me. So you poisoned her, Sophie said quietly. Slowly, to make her suffer. I wanted her to rot, Greta snarled. I wanted her to wither away while I watched, just like I withered away in this house for 20 years. And I would have gotten away with it too. The doctors were idiots. But you, she glared at Sophie. You couldn't just serve the coffee, could you? It's over, Greta, Dante said. His voice was heavy with the weight of the betrayal. Lorenzo is on his way up. It's over. Greta laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. Is it? She reached into her apron pocket. Dante tensed, expecting a weapon. But Greta didn't pull out a gun. She pulled out a phone. She pressed a single button. Do you think I'm stupid, Dante? Do you think I've been planning this for 20 years without an insurance policy? Greta smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Sophie had ever seen. I didn't just tip off the Vitis about the girl's debt. I told them exactly when the security cameras would be down. I told them exactly which gate would be unlocked. Dante's eyes widened. What did you do? The power outage wasn't the storm, Dante, Greta whispered. I cut the line. The gates are open. The Vitti hit squad isn't coming tomorrow. They're here. Now. As if on cue, the sound of automatic gunfire erupted from the floor below. Glass shattered. Men shouted. The heavy thud of boots on the stairs echoed through the mansion. They're here for you, Greta said, a look of peaceful resignation on her face. and they're here to burn this house to the ground. I told them I'd leave the master bedroom door unlocked." Dante lunged for the door to lock it, but the hallway was already filling with shadows. He slammed it shut and threw the deadbolt, but he knew it wouldn't hold against a battering ram. "Sophie," Dante said, turning to her. The anger was gone. Only the desperate need to protect remained. "The hidden passage, behind the bookshelf." "I'm not leaving you," Sophie said, grabbing his arm. "You have to," Dante said. He shoved the gun into her hand. "Take my mother. Get her into the passage. It leads to the garage. Take the armored sedan. Go." "What about you?" Sophie cried. "I have to buy you time," Dante said. He looked at Greta, who was standing in the middle of the room, smiling at the chaos she had unleashed. "You won't make it," Greta taunted. "There are 20 of them." Dante grabbed a heavy bronze statue from the mantel. He looked at Greta. "I'm not going to kill you, Greta. The Vitties will do that when they realize you're useless to them now." The door handle rattled violently. A heavy weight slammed against the wood. Thud. "Go!" Dante screamed at Sophie. "Now!" Sophie grabbed the wheelchair from the corner. With adrenaline fueling her muscles, she hoisted the semi-conscious Isabella into it. She pushed the bookshelf aside, revealing the dark, narrow tunnel. She looked back one last time. Dante was standing in the center of the room, unarmed except for the statue, facing the door, that was splintering with every blow. He looked like a king making his last stand. "I love you," Sophie screamed. "Live for me," Dante roared back. The door shattered. The secret passage smelled of damp earth and old secrets. It was narrow, the stone walls pressing in on both sides, illuminated only by the faint dying battery of the small emergency lights along the floor. Sophie's lungs burned. She wasn't an athlete. She was a waitress who pulled double shifts. But fear is a potent fuel. She pushed the wheelchair over the uneven stone floor, her heels kicking up dust. In the chair, Isabella Moretti slumped forward, her head bobbing with every bump. "Stay with me, Isabella." Sophie gasped, her voice echoing in the tunnel. "We're almost there." Above them, the sounds of the gunfight were muffled thuds, like heavy furniture being dropped. Sophie tried not to think about Dante. She tried not to picture him standing alone against 20 men with nothing but a bronze statue and a broken heart. He has to be alive, she told herself. He promised. The tunnel sloped downward, ending at a heavy steel door. Sophie fumbled for the keypad Dante had shown her once, months ago, as a just-in-case. She prayed she remembered the code. 0521. His birthday. The light turned green. The hydraulic locks hissed, and the door swung open. They were in the underground garage. It was a concrete bunker, filled with Dante's collection of cars, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, vintage Mustangs. But Sophie ran past the flash. She headed straight for the black Audi RS7 in the corner. Dante had told her it was up-armored, bulletproof glass, run-flat tires, a tank disguised as a luxury sedan. She opened the passenger door and struggled to lift Isabella. The older woman was dead weight, her skin still grey from the thallium, but she groaned as Sophie maneuvered her into the leather seat. "Dante," Isabella murmured, her eyes fluttering open. They were glassy. "He's coming," Sophie lied, buckling the seatbelt. "We have to warm up the car for him." Sophie ran to the driver's side. She jumped in, hitting the ignition button. The engine roared to life, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Suddenly, the garage elevator dinged. Sophie froze. The elevator doors slid open, and two men in tactical gear stepped out. They wore black masks, but the Vitti family crest, a viper coiled around a dagger, was stitched onto their vests. They saw the Audi. They raised their rifles. Sophie didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She slammed the gear shift into drive and stomped on the gas pedal. The Audi screeched forward, tires smoking on the polished concrete. The men opened fire. Crack, crack, crack. Bullets hammered against the windshield, spiderwebbing the glass but not penetrating. Sophie screamed, ducking her head instinctively, but she kept her foot pinned to the floor. She wasn't aiming for the exit ramp. She was aiming for the men. They dove out of the way, just as the 2-ton armored beast smashed into the elevator doors, crumpling the metal and sending the gunmen scrambling for cover behind a pillar. Sophie spun the wheel, drifting the car toward the ramp. The garage door was closed. She didn't have the remote. "Hold on!" she yelled at Isabella. She hit the garage door at 50 miles per hour. The metal buckled and tore with a screeching sound that felt like it ripped through Sophie's teeth. The car burst through the debris, exploding out into the rainy Chicago night. Debris rained down on the roof. The hood was dented, the windshield cracked, but the engine was still purring. Sophie didn't look back. She tore down the long driveway past the burning wreckage of the front gate, where the security guards had been overwhelmed. She hit the main road and floored it. Her hands were shaking so hard, she could barely grip the wheel. She was crying, hot tears blurring her vision. She wiped them away furiously. "Not now. You can cry later. If you cry now, you die." She checked the rearview mirror. No headlights yet. But the Vittis wouldn't stop. They had just declared war on the biggest crime lord in the city. They couldn't leave witnesses. Where are we going?" Isabella's voice was stronger now. The charcoal was working, absorbing the toxins, but she was still weak. Sophie looked at the GPS. She couldn't go to the police. They were on the Vitti payroll. She couldn't go to the hospital. The Vittis would check the admission logs. "The cabin," Sophie said, remembering a weekend trip Dante had taken her to. "Lake Geneva. It's off the books. It's in a trust under a fake name." "No," Isabella croaked. She struggled to sit up. "Too far. 2 hours. They catch us on the highway." "Then where?" Sophie asked, panic rising. "The slaughterhouse," Isabella whispered. "West Side, old industrial district. It belongs to my brother. He hates Dante. But he hates the Vittis more." Sophie looked at the woman next to her. For months, Isabella had looked at Sophie like she was a stain on the carpet. Now, covered in sweat, her hair falling out, dying of poison, she looked like a general commanding troops from a stretcher. "West Side." Sophie nodded. She spun the wheel, taking a hard left onto a dark service road, disappearing into the shadows of the city. The slaughterhouse was a relic of the 1920s, a sprawling brick monstrosity that smelled of rust and old copper. It was abandoned, or at least it looked that way. Sophie drove the battered Audi into the loading bay, killing the lights. Silence descended heavy and suffocating. She helped Isabella out of the car. The older woman was trembling violently now. The adrenaline was fading, and the reality of the thallium poisoning was setting in. Her legs gave out. Sophie caught her. She wasn't a big woman, but 4 years of waiting tables, carrying heavy trays, standing for 12 hours, had given her a deceptive core strength. She half-carried, half-dragged Isabella into the foreman's office, kicking the door open. It was dusty, filled with cobwebs, but there was a leather couch. Sophie laid Isabella down. "Water," Isabella rasped. Sophie found a working sink in the corner. The water was brown at first, then cleared. She filled a cracked mug she found on a desk and brought it to Isabella's lips. "Drink. You need to flush the kidneys." Isabella drank greedily. When she finished, she leaned back, closing her eyes. In the dim light filtering through the grime-caked windows, she looked ancient. "You saved me," Isabella said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, spoken with a tone of utter disbelief. "I did what I had to do," Sophie said, checking Isabella's pulse. It was steadying. "I treated you like garbage," Isabella murmured. "I called you a gold digger. I told Dante you were just a pretty face looking for a payout." "I know," Sophie said, working on checking Isabella's fingernails for Mace's lines, white bands that indicated heavy metal poisoning. They were there. "You made it very clear." "Why?" Isabella opened her eyes. The milky haze was gone, replaced by a sharp, piercing intelligence. "Why save me? Why not leave me in that bed? Greta would have taken the fall. You would have had Dante all to yourself. You would have been the grieving fiancée." Sophie stopped. She looked at the woman who had made her life hell. "Because I love him," Sophie said simply. "And you are half of him. If you died, it would destroy him. And I won't let anything destroy him." Isabella stared at her for a long time. Then, for the first time in 6 months, her face softened. It wasn't a smile exactly, but the mask of the matriarch cracked. "You have his fire," Isabella whispered. "I didn't see it before. I saw the apron. I didn't see the steel underneath." "The apron is armor," Sophie said. "You deal with hungry, angry people for minimal wage. You learn to handle anything." Suddenly, Sophie's phone buzzed. She had kept it off to avoid tracking, but she had turned it on just now to check the news. A message from an unknown number. Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. She opened it. It was a picture. Sophie covered her mouth to stifle a scream. The photo was of Dante. He was tied to a chair in what looked like a basement. His face was swollen, one eye stamped shut with a bruise. His shirt was torn, stained with blood. But he was alive. He was looking at the camera with a defiant sneer. Below the picture was a text. Trade. The mother for the son. Midnight. The docks, Pier 4. Come alone. Or we send him back in pieces. Sophie dropped the phone. She sank to her knees. "They have him." Isabella struggled to sit up, grabbing the phone. She looked at the photo. Her face didn't crumble. It turned to stone. "The Vitties," Isabella hissed. "They didn't kill him. That means they need something. They need the access codes to the offshore accounts. Dante is the only one who has them." "They want to trade," Sophie said, her voice shaking. "You for him." "Then we give them what they want," Isabella said coldly. "Watson," Sophie looked at her in horror. "I'm not handing you over to be executed." "I'm dying anyway, girl," Isabella snapped. "Look at me. The poison is in my marrow. Even with your charcoal, I have maybe a year. Maybe less. Dante has 50 years. He is the head of the family." "No." Sophie stood up. "I'm not trading lives. That's not how this works." "This is the Mafia, Sophie," Isabella shouted, then coughed violently. "That is exactly how this works. A life for a life." "Not in my world," Sophie said. She began to pace the small office. Her nursing mind was taking a back seat. Her survival mind was taking the wheel. She thought about the debts. She thought about the Vitti family structure. She thought about Greta. "Greta," Sophie said suddenly. "What about the traitor? Greta sold us out for money and revenge," Sophie said. "She thinks she won. She thinks the Vitties are her friends now." "The Vitties don't have friends," Isabella scoffed. "They have assets and liabilities. Greta is a loose end." "Exactly." Sophie turned to Isabella. "Dante told me once that the Vitti boss, Luca, is paranoid. He trusts no one. If he thought Greta was playing both sides—" "What are you thinking?" Isabella asked, watching the young woman transform. Sophie picked up the phone. "I'm not going to Pier 4 to surrender. I'm going to Pier 4 to negotiate. But I need leverage. Who is the one person Luca Vitti fears?" Isabella's eyes widened. "The Russian, Volkov, the supplier." "Does Volkov know that the Vittis just attacked the Moretti estate?" Sophie asked. "Does Volkov know that the Vittis are trying to take over the distribution routes that Volkov uses?" "No." Isabella said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Volkov hates instability. If he thinks the Vittis are starting a war that will disrupt his shipments, he will crush them." "Do you have Volkov's number?" Sophie asked. Isabella reached into her dress, pulling out a small locket. Inside, behind a picture of Dante as a baby, was a micro SD card. "It's not a number," Isabella said. "It's a ledger, evidence that the Vittis have been skimming from the Russians for years. Dante was saving it for a rainy day." Sophie took the chip. She looked at it, then at Isabella. "It's pouring outside," Sophie said and soared. She put the chip in her phone. "I need you to stay here," Sophie said, checking the magazine of the handgun she had taken from the Audi's glove box. She had never fired a gun in her life, but she knew the safety mechanism from watching Dante. "You can't go alone," Isabella protested. "You're a waitress." Sophie racked the slide. She looked at her reflection in the dirty window. Her hair was messy, her dress was torn, and she had grease on her cheek. She didn't look like a waitress. She looked like a Moretti. "I'm not just a waitress," Sophie said. "I'm the woman who is going to burn the Vittis down." She turned to the door. "Lock it behind me. If I'm not back in 2 hours, call the police and turn yourself in. It's the only way you'll be safe." "Sophie," Isabella called out. Sophie paused. "Make them pay," Isabella said. Sophie walked out into the rain. The rain at Pier 4 didn't fall. It hammered. It was a torrential sheet of water that blurred the neon lights of the city skyline across the river, turning the world into a smudge of grey and black. Sophie stepped out of the taxi she had hailed 3 blocks away. She had wiped the grease from her face, but she hadn't fixed her dress. She wore the torn hem, like a battle scar. In her hand, she clutched her phone. In her pocket, the heavy, cold weight of the gun she prayed she wouldn't have to use. The pier was a graveyard of rusted shipping containers. In the center, under the harsh glare of halogen floodlights, stood a convoy of black SUVs. And there was Dante. He was on his knees in the wet asphalt, his hands zip-tied behind his back. A man stood behind him, a gun pressed to the base of his skull. Dante looked up as Sophie approached. His face was battered, one eye sworn shut. But the good eye went wide with terror. "Sophie, no!" He screamed, his voice raw. "Get out of here! Run!" The man holding the gun pistol whipped him. Dante slumped forward, groaning. Sophie didn't flinch. She didn't run. She walked steadily toward the light, her heels clicking a rhythmic death march on the pavement. A man stepped out from between the SUVs. He was short, thick-necked, wearing a trench coat that cost more than Sophie made in a year. Luca Vitti, the man who wanted to eat the city. Well, well. Luca laughed, the sound carrying over the storm. The waitress. I thought you'd be halfway to Kansas by now. He looked behind her, scanning the darkness. Where is the old woman? Where is Isabella? She's not coming, Sophie said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the rain. Luca's smile vanished. That wasn't the deal, sweetheart. The deal was a life for a life. You want your fiancée back. You give me the matriarch. I'm changing the deal, Sophie said, stopping 10 feet away. The Vitti soldiers laughed. It was a cruel, wolfish sound. You're changing the deal, Luca mocked, stepping closer. You serve coffee, girl. You don't make demands. You have 10 seconds to tell me where Isabella is, or I blow his brains out all over your shoes. He raised his hand. The man behind Dante cocked the hammer of his gun. 5 seconds, Luca yelled. I have the ledger, Sophie shouted. Silence descended on the pier, heavier than the rain. Luca froze. What did you say? The Volkov ledger, Sophie said, holding up her phone. The one that proves you've been skimming 20% off the Russian shipment for the last 5 years. The one that proves you stole $3 million from the Red Bratva. Luca's face went pale. You're lying. That doesn't exist. Isabella kept everything. Sophie said, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would crack her ribs. Every transaction, every faked manifest, it's all on a chip, and that chip is in this phone. Luca stared at her. He looked at his men. He looked back at her. Give it to me. Let him go, Sophie demanded. Give me the phone, and I'll let you both live. Luca negotiated, his voice straining. Sophie shook her head. No, you'll kill us the second you have it. I know who you are, Luca. You're a scavenger. Kill him, Luca ordered the guard. If you kill him, Sophie screamed, holding her thumb over the screen. I hit send. Luca signaled the guard to wait. Send to who? To Viktor Volkov. Sophie lied. She hadn't sent it yet. She needed to stall. I have the email drafted. His personal encrypted server. 1 tap and every Russian hitman in the hemisphere knows you stole from them. Luca licked his lips. He was sweating despite the cold rain. He knew Volkov. Volkov didn't do trials. He did executions. You're bluffing, Luca sneered. You don't have Volkov's contact. Isabella does, Sophie shot back, and she gave it to me. Luca took a step forward, pulling a gold-plated Desert Eagle from his coat. I think you're a scared little girl, playing dress-up. I'm going to count to 3. If you don't hand me that phone, I shoot Dante. Then I shoot you. And then I find the old woman myself. 1. Sophie looked at Dante. He was looking at her with awe. He nodded imperceptibly. Do it, his eyes said. 2. Sophie didn't hit send. She knew that once she sent it, her leverage was gone. Luca would kill them out of spite. She needed a miracle. 3. Bang! The gunshot was deafening. Sophie flinched, screaming Dante's name. But Dante didn't fall. Luca Vitti stumbled. He looked down at his shoulder. A red blossom of blood was exploding through his trench coat. He dropped his gun, clutching the wound, looking around wildly. Who? Suddenly the shipping containers around them groaned. The rusted doors swung open. Dozens of men poured out. They weren't police. They weren't Vitti soldiers. They were large, pale men, with tattoos climbing up their necks. They held AK-47s with practiced ease. And walking through the middle of them was a giant. A man with a thick grey beard and eyes like ice. Viktor Volkov. Luka fell to his knees. Viktor, I can explain. Volkov didn't look at Luka. He walked straight to Sophie. He towered over her, smelling of vodka and expensive tobacco. Isabella Moretti is a difficult woman. Volkov rumbled his voice like grinding stones. But she is a woman of her word. She called me an hour ago. She told me to meet you here. Sophie let out a breath she felt she had been holding for a lifetime. Isabella hadn't just trusted her with the chip. She had called in the cavalry. She told me you had a gift for me, Volkov said, holding out a massive hand. Sophie placed the phone in his palm. The proof, everything he stole from you. Volkov looked at the screen. He scrolled for a moment. Then he looked at Luka. Greed is a sin, Luka, Volkov said calmly. Viktor, please. Luka begged, crawling backward on the wet pavement. It was a misunderstanding. I can pay it back double. Volkov turned his back on him. He looked at his men. He nodded once. 2 Russians grabbed Luka and dragged him toward the edge of the pier. His screams were swallowed by the sound of the storm, and then a splash. Silence returned. The Viti soldiers dropped their weapons hands in the air. They knew better than to fight the Red Bratva. Volkov looked at Sophie. You have courage, Devushka. Isabella chose well. He gestured to Dante. One of the Russians cut the zip ties. Dante scrambled to his feet. He didn't run to Volkov. He didn't check his wounds. He ran to Sophie. He collided with her, wrapping his arms around her so tight it hurt. He buried his face in her neck, sobbing openly. I thought I lost you. I thought I lost you. Sophie held him up her hands, tangling in his wet hair. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You came for me, Dante whispered, pulling back to look at her. You walked into the lion's den for me. You're my family, Dante, Sophie said, wiping blood from his cheek. We protect our own. Volkov cleared his throat. The Vitis are finished. Their territory is up for negotiation. I assume the Morettis will be taking over management. Dante straightened up. He shifted instantly from the lover to the Don. He put an arm around Sophie's waist, pulling her flush against him. It wasn't a gesture of possession. It was a partnership. We will, Dante said, and the Russian percentage remains untouched, as a gesture of gratitude. Volkov smiled, showing a row of gold teeth. Good business. Go home to your mother, Dante. She is waiting. 6 months later. The cathedral was filled with the scent of white roses and expensive perfume. The pews were packed with the most powerful people in Chicago, politicians, judges, and captains of industry. At the front, Dante stood waiting. He looked devastating in a tuxedo, but his eyes were fixed on the massive oak doors. The organ music swelled. The doors opened. Sophie stepped through. She wasn't wearing a traditional dress. She wore a gown of crushed velvet and silk tailored to perfection. She didn't look like a waitress. She didn't look like a nurse. She looked like a queen. But she didn't walk alone. Next to her linking arms was Isabella Moretti. Isabella was thin, but strong. Her hair was growing back a stylish silver pixie cut that highlighted her sharp cheekbones. She walked with a cane, but she held her head high. The crowd murmured. It was unheard of. The mother of the groom, walking the bride down the aisle, Isabella leaned into Sophie as they began the slow walk. You look beautiful, figlia mia, Isabella whispered. My daughter. Thank you, Mum. Sophie smiled, squeezing her arm. They reached the altar. Isabella kissed Sophie's cheek and then placed Sophie's hand in Dante's. Take care of her, Isabella commanded her son, or I will deal with you myself. Dante laughed, the sound full of pure joy. "I wouldn't dare cross her mama. She's tougher than you are." "I know." Isabella smiled, stepping back. "That's why I let her keep the gun." Dante looked at Sophie. He lifted her veil. "Hi." "Hi," Sophie whispered. "Are you ready for this life?" Dante asked seriously. "No more diners, no more quiet nights, just us against the world." Sophie looked out at the crowd. She saw the respect in their eyes. She thought about Greta, who was currently serving a life sentence in a federal prison, raving about conspiracies that no one believed. She thought about the debts she had paid off, the home she had saved, and the man standing in front of her. She had walked through fire, poison, and bullets to get here. "I'm not afraid of the world, Dante," Sophie said, pulling him down for a kiss. "I own it." And as they kissed and the church erupted in applause, Sophie knew it was true. The waitress was gone. The Mafia queen had risen. And long live the queen. And that, my friends, is how a simple act of kindness, saving a life when everyone else saw only death, changed the fate of the entire Chicago underworld. Sophie proved that loyalty isn't about bloodlines. It's about who stands by you when the gun is pointed at your head. Isabella learned that a title doesn't make you strong, but love does. And Greta, well, let's just say, betrayal has a bitter aftertaste that lasts a lifetime. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of romance, betrayal, and revenge, please smash that like button. It helps us bring more stories like this to life. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a chaotic twist. What would you have done in Sophie's shoes? Would you have saved the mother who hated you? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, keep your friends close and your secrets closer.